Hey, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jennifer and I'll be narrating today's story. This is a piece of human written science fiction, so get comfortable and let's jump right in.
The palace froze. When the humans screamed, "Don't eat that, it's poison," to the queen. The grand celestial hall of the Empire of Ilyssar was a monument to elegance that defied human comprehension. Crystal columns soared 3 stories high, refracting the light of twin moons through prismatic panels that cast the assembled nobility in an ever-shifting rainbow of colors. The air itself seemed to shimmer with an almost liquid quality, thick with exotic perfumes and the gentle harmonics of Ilyssarian throat singing that vibrated through frequencies humans couldn't naturally perceive. Nicolas Evans stood against the eastern wall, a monolith of muscle and controlled power among the willowy aristocrats who glided past him like silk scarves on a breeze. At 6'4" and 240 pounds of high-gravity forged density, he was an anomaly in a room full of beings who had evolved under gentle planetary conditions. His formal security uniform, deep black with the silver star of Ardent Vale emblazoned on his chest, did nothing to soften his presence. If anything, it emphasized the deliberate, heavy way he moved, each gesture carrying the weight of a man who had spent his entire life fighting 3 times Earth's gravity. His intense blue eyes tracked every movement in the room with the cold efficiency of a predator, not because he wanted to intimidate, though he absolutely did, but because that was what you did when you were responsible for keeping humans alive in alien spaces. Ambassador Harper had made it clear. This banquet was a crucial diplomatic opportunity. The Empire of Ilyssar controlled 3 of the most resource-rich systems in the sector, and humanity's fledgling colony network desperately needed their goodwill. "Try to blend in," Harper had said before the event, her dark eyes pleading. Nicolas had looked down at his body, built like a brick shithouse, as his training sergeant used to say, and then at the ethereal Ilyssarians drifting through the pre-banquet reception. "Ma'am, I'm not sure that's physically possible," she'd sighed. "Then at least try not to break anything. Or anyone." Now, 2 hours into the banquet, Nicolas was beginning to understand why humans made the Ilyssarians nervous. Everything here was delicate. The chairs looked like they were made of crystallized spider silk. The serving platters seemed to float on magnetic fields, requiring only the slightest touch to guide them. Even the food itself had an almost translucent quality, as if it might dissolve on the tongue like morning mist. The Ilyssarians themselves were no less ethereal. Tall and slender, with skin that ranged from pale jade to deep emerald, they moved with a fluid grace that made human motion look clumsy by comparison. Their large, luminous eyes, adapted for a home world with less light than Earth, gave them an appearance that was simultaneously beautiful and unsettling. And at the head of the grand table, presiding over it all like a goddess made flesh, sat Queen Axane. Nicolas had seen her image before, of course. You couldn't work diplomatic security without studying the key players, but no hologram could capture the reality of her presence. Her skin glowed with a soft emerald luminescence that shifted with her emotions, currently a contented pearl green as she listened to some courtier's story. Her dark hair, so black it seemed to drink in the light around it, flowed over her shoulders and down her back in waves that defied gravity. The crown she wore was a masterwork of woven gold that seemed to grow organically from her brow, adorned with sapphires that matched the deep blue of her gown. She laughed at something, the courtier said, and the sound carried across the hall like wind chimes. Every being in the room seemed to lean toward her, drawn by some ineffable charisma that transcended species barriers. Nicolas remained unmoved. He'd learned long ago that beautiful things could kill you just as dead as ugly ones. Faster, usually, because you didn't see them coming. He checked his chronometer. Another hour, maybe 2, and he could escort Ambassador Harper back to the human quarter and... The light changed. It was so subtle that Nicolas almost missed it. A prismatic shift in the air above the Queen's plate, where a server was delicately placing a piece of star fruit, a delicacy that looked like crystallized honey with veins of purple running through it. In the dense, mineral-rich atmosphere of Ardent Vale, Nicolas had learned to read the air itself. Chemical changes created minute alterations in light refraction, a survival trait when your world tried to poison you with every breath. What he saw now made his blood freeze. The air above the fruit was wrong. The light bent at an angle that spoke of organic compounds that had no business being there. Alkaloids, probably neurotoxic, definitely lethal. His body moved before his conscious mind fully processed the information. 3 years of high-gravity combat training overrode every diplomatic protocol Ambassador Harper had drilled into him. He launched himself forward, his voice tearing through the delicate harmonics of the banquet like a gunshot. "Your Majesty, don't eat that, it's poison." The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Every conversation stopped, every head turned. The throat singer's harmonics collapsed into discordant silence. Queen Axane's hand, which had been reaching for the fruit with delicate grace, froze halfway to her mouth. Nicolas didn't stop moving. He couldn't. The momentum of his high-gravity body was like a freight train. He crossed 30 feet in less than 2 seconds, his heavy boots cracking the decorative floor tiles. Ilyssarian nobles scattered before him like leaves in a hurricane. 2 members of the royal guard, sleek, armored, and fast, moved to intercept him. They were quick, trained, and utterly unprepared for the reality of human kinetics. Nicolas didn't even slow down. He shifted his shoulders slightly, and the first guard bounced off him like she'd hit a wall. The second managed to get a hand on his arm, but Nicolas's momentum was 3 times what she'd trained for. She stumbled, her grip breaking. He reached the queen's table and slammed his palm down on it, making dishes jump and wine slosh from crystal glasses. His other hand shot out and knocked the plate with the star fruit away, sending it spinning across the table. Then, suddenly, he was surrounded. 8 royal guards had him in a circle, their ceremonial pikes lowered, and very much not ceremonial energy fields crackling at the tips. The captain of the guard, a stern-faced female with skin the color of sea glass and eyes like chips of amber, had her pike pressed against his throat. "On your knees, human," she hissed. "You have assaulted the presence of the sovereign queen." Nicolas didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on Queen Axane, who was staring at him with an expression of complete shock. Up close, her beauty was even more pronounced, but so was the intelligence in those large, luminous eyes. She wasn't just surprised, she was analyzing, processing, trying to understand what had just happened. "The fruit," Nicolas said, his voice rough from the shout but steady. "It's poisoned. Don't let anyone touch it." A new voice cut through the tension, smooth, cultured, and dripping with disdain. "Preposterous. This is nothing more than a barbaric disruption by a species that doesn't understand civilized behavior." The High Advisor stepped into view. Councilor Thel'var was everything Nicolas had learned to distrust in his 30 years of life. Elegant to the point of affectation, with silver-toned skin that marked him as coming from Ilyssar's highest noble caste, he moved with the confidence of someone who had never faced a real threat in his life. His robes were white silk with golden threading, and he wore more jewelry than seemed structurally sound. "Remove this creature from Her Majesty's presence," Thel'var continued, addressing the captain of the guard. "Immediately, and confine the human delegation to their quarters, pending a full investigation of this incident." "Wait." Queen Axane's voice was soft, but it carried absolute authority. Every guard froze. Every eye in the hall turned to her. She rose from her seat with fluid grace, her skin shifting to a pale, uncertain blue-green. Her gaze was fixed on Nicolas, studying him with an intensity that made him feel like he was being dissected. "You disrupted a royal banquet, assaulted my guards, and destroyed part of my meal," she said quietly. "These are offenses that would normally warrant immediate exile, if not worse. Tell me, Nicolas Evans of Ardent Vale, yes, I know who you are, tell me why I should believe this claim of poison." Nicolas met her gaze steadily. "Because I'm not trying to start a diplomatic incident, Your Majesty. I'm trying to stop you from dying." "He's lying," Thel'var interjected smoothly. "Obviously attempting to create chaos for reasons we can only guess at. Perhaps humanity's desperation for trade agreements has driven them to—" "I can prove it," Nicolas interrupted, and the advisor's face darkened at being cut off. Queen Axane tilted her head. "Prove it? How? Do you have a laser pointer, or any coherent light source?" The head scientist, a wizened Ilyssarian male named Venthar with skin like aged parchment, was summoned from the observatory wing. He arrived carrying a portable spectral analyzer, muttering about ruined experiments and diplomatic foolishness. They'd moved to a side chamber off the main hall, a more intimate space with fewer witnesses. Queen Axane sat in a high-backed chair that looked like it had been grown rather than built, her expression neutral but her skin still that uncertain blue-green. Thel'var stood at her right hand, his face a mask of patient condescension. The captain of the guard, who Nicolas had learned was named Syl'vara, kept her pike pointed at his back. Ambassador Harper had managed to push her way into the room, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. She stood near the door, clearly trying to decide whether to defend Nicolas or disown him entirely. The fruit in question sat on a simple metal tray in the center of a table. It still looked beautiful, crystalline and perfect, the purple veins pulsing gently with what Nicolas now knew was poison. "Explain your theory, human," Thel'var said, adjusting the settings on his analyzer with gnarled fingers. His tone made it clear he expected to be exposing a fraud. Nicolas pointed at the fruit. "Starfruit is mostly water and complex sugars, right? Simple organic compounds, very clean chemically." "Obviously," Thel'var replied. "That's why it's served at royal functions. It's essentially neutral, no allergens, no strong flavors to offend delicate palates." "Right. So when I looked at it with my Aegis Sight—" "Your what?" Thel'var interrupted with a dismissive laugh. "Aegis Sight? Is this some kind of mystical human superstition?" Nicolas turned his cold blue eyes on the advisor. "It's what we call it on Ardent Vale. Our atmosphere is dense. 0.9, 4 atmospheres at sea level, with high mineral content that creates natural aerosols. You learn to read the air or you die. Chemical changes create refraction patterns. I can see them." "That's actually theoretically possible," Thel'var said slowly, his dismissive tone fading into genuine interest. "Humans have better visual acuity than Ilyssarians in certain spectrums. If you trained from childhood in a mineral-rich atmosphere," he trailed off, clearly running calculations in his head. "When I looked at that fruit," Nicolas continued, "the light was bending wrong. There were organic compounds present that shouldn't be there. Alkaloid-based, probably nitrogen-rich. In human terms, poison." "Use your analyzer," Queen Axane said to Thel'var. "It wasn't a request." The old scientist grumbled but complied, passing his device over the fruit. The display lit up with spectral lines and chemical formulas that meant nothing to Nicolas, but apparently meant a great deal to Thel'var. His expression went from skeptical to shocked to horrified in the space of 3 seconds. "By the first star," he breathed. "He's right, necroxin compound. Incredibly sophisticated, it's been bonded to the natural sugars in the fruit's structure. Our standard scanners wouldn't detect it because it reads as part of the fruit itself until it's metabolized." The room went deadly silent. "How much?" Queen Axane asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her skin had gone pale, almost white with shock. "Enough to kill you within the hour," Thel'var said bluntly. "And it would look like natural causes, a rare allergic reaction perhaps, or a sudden cardiac event. There would be no way to prove poisoning after the fact." Thel'var's face had gone carefully neutral. "Then we must immediately investigate who had access to the Queen's food. Captain Syl'vara, lock down the kit harpers. No one enters or leaves." "Already done," Syl'vara said, but her eyes were now on Nicolas with a very different expression. Not respect, not yet, but something close to it. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement that he'd been right when she'd been ready to skewer him. Queen Axane stood slowly, her movements no longer fluid but careful, controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Councilor Thel'var, you will coordinate with Captain Syl'vara to investigate this assassination attempt. Use whatever resources you need. I want names by morning." "Of course, Your Majesty," Thel'var said with a bow that was just slightly too deep, too perfect. "Dr. Thel'var, you will compile a full analysis of the toxin and how it was introduced. I want to know exactly how this was done." "It shall be so," the old scientist replied. Then the Queen turned to Nicolas, her eyes huge, luminous, and currently swirling with emotions he couldn't begin to read fixed on him with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. "You," she said quietly, "will come with me." The Queen's private chambers were nothing like Nicolas expected. He'd anticipated opulence taken to absurd levels, perhaps more crystal and floating furniture, definitely more of that delicate aesthetic that dominated every public space in the palace. Instead, he found himself in rooms that felt almost human, or at least closer to human than anything else he'd seen in the Empire of Ilyssar. The walls were still elegant, but they were solid real stone with veins of luminescent mineral running through it. The furniture looked sturdy enough to actually sit on. Books, actual physical books, lined shelves that reached to the ceiling. A large window looked out over the capital city, its lights twinkling like stars reflected in water. Queen Axane dismissed the guards who had escorted them, including a very reluctant Syl'vara, and closed the door with a soft click. Then she turned to face Nicolas, and for the first time since the banquet, she let her careful composure slip. Her skin flickered through a rapid series of colors: blue, pale green, darker emerald, white, and back to blue again. Her hands, which had been gracefully folded at her waist, came up to grip her arms as if she were cold. She took a shuddering breath. "I nearly died tonight," she said, and her voice was nothing like the commanding tone she'd used in the side chamber. This was raw, honest, afraid. "If you hadn't been there, If you hadn't seen, I would have eaten that fruit. I was hungry. I would have smiled at the court and eaten it, and within an hour I would have been dead." Nicolas didn't move. He stood near the door, very aware that he was alone with the sovereign ruler of an empire, in her private chambers, and he had no idea what the protocol was for this situation. Ambassador Harper had definitely not covered this scenario. "Someone in my palace tried to murder me," Axane continued, and now there was anger mixing with the fear. Her skin darkened to a deep, stormy green. "Someone I trust. Someone close enough to access my food before it reaches the table, and I didn't even suspect. I was sitting there, laughing, completely oblivious." "Your Majesty," Nicolas began, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Axane," she said, "when we're alone, call me Axane. I'm so tired of titles and formality and people who only speak to me because they have to." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "For all I know, the next person who calls me Your Majesty will be trying to kill me too." She moved to the window, her movements no longer fluid but jerky with stress. Nicolas followed her with his eyes, tracking her motion the way he'd been trained to track potential threats. Except she wasn't a threat. She was the person he'd sworn to protect, at least for tonight. "How did you see it?" she asked, not looking at him. Thel'var said, "Our standard scanners couldn't detect the poison. How did you?" "I told you. Aegis Sight." "Explain it to me properly, not the diplomatic version, the real version." Nicolas considered his words carefully. Ardent Vale has 3G gravity. That means everything is 3 times heavier than it is on Earth. 3 times harder to move, 3 times harder to breathe. Our atmosphere is thick enough that you can see it waves in the air like you're looking through water, and it's full of minerals that off-worlders say makes it smell like rust and ozone. He moved closer, still maintaining a respectful distance, but near enough that she could hear him without him having to raise his voice. "When you grow up breathing that air, you learn to read it. Certain minerals make certain colors when the light hits them just right. Some of them are harmless, some of them will kill you in minutes. By the time you're 5 years old on Ardent Vale, you can tell the difference between safe air and poison air just by looking at it." "That's extraordinary," Axane said softly. She'd turned from the window to face him, her skin settling into a pale, curious blue-green. "We have technology that does similar things, but you're saying you can do it naturally, just with your eyes?" "Not just eyes. Training, experience. A childhood spent learning that if you make a mistake, you die." She studied him with open fascination now. "I've read reports about human death worlds, but I confess, I thought they were exaggerated. Propaganda to make your species seem more intimidating than it actually is." "Ardent Vale isn't as bad as Earth," Nicolas said with a slight shrug that still carried enough weight to make his shoulders ripple under his uniform. "Earth is rated Class 7 Death World by the Galactic Council. Ardent Vale is only Class 5. Still, it's enough that off-worlders need assisted breathing and exoskeletons just to walk around. And you live there? Permanently? Born there, raised there, trained there." Axane took a step closer. Then another. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like she was approaching something that might spook and run. When she was within arm's reach, she stopped. "May I?" she asked, lifting one delicate hand. Nicolas wasn't sure what she was asking permission for, but he nodded. She reached out and touched his forearm where it was exposed below the sleeve of his uniform. Her fingers were cool and soft against his skin. She pressed gently, and Nicolas saw her eyes widen as she felt the resistance muscle and bone with a density that her species simply didn't possess. "You feel like stone," she whispered. "Living stone. High-gravity evolution?" Nicolas said, hyper-aware of her touch. "Our bones are denser, our muscles have more fast-twitch fibers, even our blood carries oxygen more efficiently." She slid her hand up his arm slowly, her expression one of wonder and something else, something that made Nicolas' pulse quicken despite his training. When her fingers reached his bicep, she squeezed experimentally and laughed in surprise. "It doesn't even compress. How fast can you move?" "Fast enough. Show me." Before Axane could blink, Nicolas had moved 3 feet to the left. He hadn't run or lunged, just shifted his weight, and was suddenly in a different position. Then he was back, standing exactly where he'd been, as if he'd never moved at all. Axane's skin flashed bright blue with excitement. "That's incredible. Our guards are trained for speed, but nothing like that." "How?" "High-gravity combat training. When everything weighs 3 times more, including you learn to use momentum and kinetic energy more efficiently. On a low-gravity world like this," he spread his hands, "I'm basically operating in slow motion compared to what my body is used to." So when you ran toward me at the banquet, I was moving at about 40% of my actual speed. If I'd gone full out, I would have put my boot through someone's torso. The statement hung in the air between them. It wasn't a boast, just a fact. A reminder that for all his diplomacy training, for all his careful attempts to blend in, Nicolas was fundamentally a weapon. A predator in a room full of prey. Axane should have looked afraid. Any sensible person would have. Instead, her skin shifted to a warm, dark green that Nicolas didn't recognize, and she smiled. "You saved my life," she said simply. "You saw something no one else could see. You acted when everyone else would have hesitated, and you saved my life. Do you understand what that means in Ilyssarian culture?" Ambassador Harper mentioned something about life debts, but she wasn't specific. "It means I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid. A debt that supersedes law, protocol, even my own authority as queen. If you asked me to abdicate right now and give you the throne, I would be honor-bound to at least consider it seriously. I don't want your throne, your Axane." "Then, what do you want?" The question caught Nicolas off guard. What did he want? He'd spent his entire adult life in service, first to the Ardent Vale militia, then to the colonial security force, and now to the diplomatic corps. He'd never really stopped to ask himself what he wanted beyond the next mission, the next posting, the next threat to neutralize. "Right now," he said carefully, "I want to figure out who tried to kill you and make sure they don't get a second chance." Axane's smile widened, and her skin glowed with that warm dark green again. "Then, we want the same thing? Good, because I'm going to need your help, Nicolas Evans of Ardent Vale. I'm going to need those predator eyes of yours to see what I can't see. Will you help me?" Nicolas should have said no. Should have explained that this was way beyond his job description, that he needed to clear it with Ambassador Harper, that there were protocols and procedures for this kind of thing. Instead, he met her luminous eyes and said, "Yes." They spent the next 3 hours reviewing security footage in a small office adjacent to Axane's chambers. It was tedious work, made more complicated by the fact that Ilyssarian security systems were designed for Ilyssarian eyes and perception. The footage cycled through spectrum bands that looked like abstract art to Nicolas, and Axane had to keep translating what he was seeing. "That shimmer in the corner is Guard Lieutenant Corvan," she explained, pointing at what looked to Nicolas like a watercolor painting having a seizure. "He's on patrol route, Theta 7, which takes him past the Kit Harpers. 3 times per shift, yes." Nicolas made a note on the datapad Axane had provided. His list of suspects was growing disturbingly long. Access to the Queen's food required clearance that at least 40 people in the palace possessed. Narrowing it down would take days, if not weeks. "Go back," he said suddenly. 30 seconds. Axane reversed the footage, and Nicolas leaned closer to the display. "There, freeze it." The image froze, showing what Axane had identified as the head food taster, Malvex, reviewing a tray of prepared dishes. To Ilyssarian eyes, it probably looked perfectly normal. But Nicolas's predator eyes, his Aegis Sight, caught something in the way the male held his body. "What do you see?" Axane asked, leaning so close that Nicolas could smell her, something like jasmine and ozone, distinctly alien but not unpleasant. "Micro-expression. Look at his face right before he inspects the starfruit." "I'm looking. I don't see anything unusual." His eyes. They tighten at the corners for just a fraction of a second. And his shoulders pull back slightly like he's bracing himself. That could be anything. Nervousness about doing his job properly, perhaps. Or nervousness about doing something he shouldn't be doing. Nicolas zoomed in on Malvex's hands. Watch his fingers when he lifts the fruit. They watched in slow motion as the food taster's long, delicate fingers grasped the crystalline fruit. For just a moment, less than a second, his grip changed. It went from the casual hold of someone inspecting food to something more deliberate, more controlled. "He's not examining it," Nicolas said quietly. "He's marking it. See how his thumb presses just a little harder on that side? He's making sure he knows which piece is which." Axane's skin went pale blue, so he can avoid serving himself the poisoned piece during the tasting ritual. "By the first star, Nicolas. You're right, but why?" "Malvex has been with my household for 6 years. He's never given any indication." An alarm shrieked through the palace. Nicolas was on his feet and moving before his conscious mind processed the sound. His hand went to his hip, where his sidearm should have been but wasn't. Palace security had confiscated it before the banquet. He cursed and looked around for anything he could use as a weapon. Axane was already at the door, her hand on the control panel. "That's the environmental alarm. Something's wrong with the atmospheric controls in..." The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in a sickly red glow. Through the door, Nicolas could hear shouting and the sound of running footsteps. "Stay here," he ordered, but Axane was already shaking her head. "This is my palace. I'm not hiding while." The wall exploded. Not metaphorically, literally, exploded. A section of the stone wall between Axane's office and the adjoining room detonated inward in a shower of rock and dust. The force of the blast threw both of them backward. Nicolas felt chunks of stone impact his chest and arms, but his high-gravity body absorbed the damage that would have killed a lighter-built being. Axane wasn't as lucky. She hit the ground hard, her head cracking against the stone floor. Her eyes went unfocused, and her skin flashed through a rapid series of colors that Nicolas instinctively knew meant pain and disorientation. Then, something came through the hole in the wall. It was an Ilyssarian, but wrong. Its skin was mottled gray and black, and it wore some kind of mechanical harness that obscured its features. In its hands was a weapon that Nicolas didn't recognize but definitely understood: energy weapon, probably plasma-based, definitely lethal. The assassin raised the weapon toward Axane. Nicolas moved. His high-gravity body, already pumping with adrenaline, launched across the distance between him and the Queen in less time than it took the assassin to squeeze the trigger. He hit Axane with a controlled tackle that scooped her up and rolled them both behind a stone desk, just as plasma fire scorched the air where she'd been lying. The desk shuddered under the impact of the energy blasts. Stone cracked and melted, filling the air with the smell of superheated rock. Nicolas pressed Axane against the floor, using his body as a shield. He could feel her trembling beneath him, could feel the rapid flutter of her pulse against his chest. "Stay down," he growled. The plasma fire stopped. Nicolas heard the distinctive sound of an energy cell being replaced. The assassin was reloading. He had maybe 3 seconds. He grabbed a chunk of broken stone the size of his fist and surged to his feet. The assassin was bringing the weapon back up, but humans from high-gravity worlds didn't just move fast, they threw hard. Nicolas hurled the stone with all the kinetic force his body could generate. The rock crossed the distance in a blur and hit the assassin in the center of its chest. Even through the mechanical harness, the impact was devastating. The assassin flew backward through the hole in the wall and hit something solid with a wet crunch. Nicolas didn't wait to see if it would get back up. He scooped Axane into his arms. She weighed almost nothing to him, barely 50 kilograms, and ran. The corridor outside was chaos. Nobles and servants were fleeing in every direction, their panicked movements made worse by the emergency lighting. Nicolas bowled through them, not slowing down, trusting his mass to make them get out of the way. "Where?" he snapped at Axane, who was conscious but still dazed. "Safe room," she managed. "Third corridor, left turn, red door." Nicolas followed her directions, his boots pounding against the ornate floor hard enough to crack tiles. Behind them, he heard more explosions and the distinctive whine of plasma weapons. This wasn't just one assassin, this was a coordinated attack. They reached the red door, and Axane pressed her palm against the biometric scanner with a trembling hand. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a small, reinforced room with walls that looked like they could withstand a nuclear blast. Nicolas carried her inside and set her gently on a low couch. Only then did he realize he was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the adrenaline crash that always followed combat. His hands were shaking slightly as he checked Axane for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "My head," she said, wincing as his fingers found a lump already forming where she'd hit the floor. "And my dignity. I'm the sovereign queen, and I just got carried through my own palace like a sack of grain. Better alive and embarrassed than dead and dignified." She laughed, but it turned into a wince of pain. "True, very true. Thank you. Again. Just doing my job. Your job is diplomatic security, not throwing rocks at assassins and carrying queens to safety." "My job is whatever it needs to be to keep you alive," Nicolas said firmly. Then more gently, "Let me look at your head." Axane tilted her face up, and Nicolas carefully parted her hair to examine the injury. The skin was unbroken, but there was definitely swelling. On a human, he'd be worried about a concussion. On an Ilyssarian, he had no idea what symptoms to look for. "You should have medical attention," he said. "Later. First, we need to understand what just happened." She pulled away from his touch, though he noticed she did so reluctantly. That wasn't a random attack. The timing was too perfect. They waited until we were alone, until we'd isolated ourselves reviewing the footage. Which means someone knew what we were doing. Or someone has access to our security systems. Nicolas felt a chill run down his spine. Axane, if they can see through your security feeds, they know we're in this safe room right now. She shook her head. This room is completely isolated. No feeds in or out. It's the only place in the palace that's truly secure. She paused, her skin shifting to a worried pale blue. But it also means we're trapped. If they control the palace systems, they can just wait us out. Can you contact anyone from here? There's a hardwired emergency channel to the guard headquarters. But, she hesitated, and Nicolas saw the fear in her eyes. How do I know who to trust? If my food taster is a traitor, if my security systems are compromised, who else might be working against me? It was a fair question, and one Nicolas didn't have a good answer for. In his experience, once you found one traitor, you usually found a network. Betrayal was like rot, it spread. Start with Captain Syl'vara, he suggested. She was ready to skewer me at the banquet, which means she takes your safety seriously, and she was the first one to act when the alarm went off. That suggests loyalty. Axane considered this, then nodded. You're right. Syl'vara may be rigid and occasionally insufferable, but she's never given me reason to doubt her dedication. She moved to a panel on the wall and pressed her hand against it. This might take a minute. The hardwired system is old. While they waited, Nicolas did a quick inventory of the safe room. It was well stocked with emergency supplies, food, water, medical kits, and most importantly, weapons. He found a plasma pistol that was clearly designed for Ilyssarian hands but would work well enough, plus several concussion grenades and what looked like a riot shield. Expecting a siege? He asked, holding up the shield. These safe rooms were built during the succession wars 300 years ago. Back then, palace coups were more common. Axane's expression was grim. I never thought I'd actually need to use one. The communication panel beeped, and Syl'vara's face appeared on the screen. The captain of the guard looked like she'd been through a war. Her armor was scorched, and there was a cut across her cheek that was leaking pale green blood. Your Majesty, thank the first star. We lost track of you during the attack. I'm secure, Captain. What's the situation? Under control now, but barely. We had 4 simultaneous breaches in different sections of the palace, coordinated, professional, and nearly successful. We've eliminated or captured most of the infiltrators, but... She hesitated. We lost 12 guards, Your Majesty, and we found Malvex dead in the Kit Harper's. Throat cut, probably to keep him from talking. Axane's skin went white. He was involved then. We suspected Nicolas spotted him on the security footage doing something suspicious with the starfruit. Syl'vara's eyes flicked to where Nicolas was visible on the screen. Her expression was complicated, respect warring with suspicion. The human saw this? The human saved my life, twice now in one night. Axane's tone brooked no argument. I'm placing him under my personal protection and granting him temporary security clearance. He will assist in the investigation. Your Majesty, with respect, that's highly irregular. He's not even a citizen of the Empire, and he's the only one who's proven he can see threats that our own people miss. Unless you'd prefer I trust my safety to a palace full of potential traitors? Syl'vara flinched. No, Your Majesty, forgive me. What are your orders? Secure the palace. Find out how they breached our defenses, and... Axane paused, glancing at Nicolas. Start a quiet investigation into anyone who had access to my schedule tonight. Someone knew we'd be alone in my chambers reviewing security footage. That information leak is as dangerous as the assassins themselves. It will be done. Should I send an escort to bring you back to the main palace? Not yet. I'll stay here until you've confirmed the all clear. And Captain, trust no one completely, not even yourself. Syl'vara's face hardened with understanding. Understood, Your Majesty. The screen went dark, and Axane slumped back against the wall. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her looking small and vulnerable and very, very tired. Nicolas sat down next to her, keeping a respectful distance but close enough that she could reach him if she needed to. They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the hum of the safe room's environmental systems. I think, Axane said quietly, that I'm in much more danger than I realized. Yeah, Nicolas agreed. I think you're right. Dr. Venthar arrived at the safe room 6 hours later, escorted by Syl'vara and 4 heavily armed guards. The old scientist looked half dead on his feet, hands trembling, skin ashen from exhaustion. Your Majesty, he said, bowing deeply. I bring troubling news. Axane, who had been resting against Nicolas's shoulder, straightened at once. More troubling than assassination attempts? She asked. Different but just as severe. Venthar activated a holographic display. The poison necroxin is not designed solely to kill. It was engineered to paralyze voluntary motor control while rendering the victim susceptible to pheromone-based manipulation. The room went silent. You're saying it wouldn't have killed her, Nicolas said carefully. It would have made her controllable. Exactly. Species-specific pheromones keyed to Ilyssarian neurology. Whoever administered it could have made the Queen sign documents, issue commands, appear autonomous. Axane's skin drained to a sickly gray. How long? She asked. 72 hours, possibly longer. She swallowed. Enough time to dissolve the council, declare war, hand over territory. There is more, Thel'var continued. I recognize the pheromone signature. Syl'vara stiffened. Whose? Thel'var hesitated, then met Axane's eyes. High Councilor Thel'var. Axane staggered. Nicolas caught her before she fell. He helped raise me, she whispered. He was my father's closest advisor. This betrayal is personal, Nicolas said quietly. We must arrest him, Syl'vara snapped. You won't, Thel'var said. He fled during the chaos. His chambers are empty. Axane steadied herself. We cannot make this public. If the people learn the High Councilor attempted to enslave their queen, the Empire fractures. Syl'vara exhaled sharply. Then what do you propose? Axane turned to Nicolas, her gaze unwavering. I need someone without court ties. Someone I trust, absolutely. Understanding dawned in Syl'vara's eyes. No. I will invoke the blood bond. Shock rippled through the room. That ritual hasn't been used in centuries, Thel'var said. It binds two lives completely. If one dies, the other follows. I die anyway if I stand alone, Axane said. This gives me certainty. Nicolas raised a hand. Someone explain before I accidentally agree to something catastrophic. Axane faced him. The blood bond binds us biologically. You would become my eternal protector. Your authority would supersede the council in matters of my safety. That's intense. It's also absolute. There are risks, Thel'var added. It has never been attempted between species. Axane's skin shifted to a resolute blue. I already owe him my life. This makes the debt mutual. She looked at Nicolas, vulnerable and unguarded. I'm asking, not commanding. Will you accept? He should have refused. Instead, he saw her fear, her isolation, and remembered moving without thought to save her at the banquet. One condition, he said. If I accept, my orders are obeyed. Yes, then I accept. The ritual was brief. Blood samples, a glowing catalyst, injections. You'll sense each other, Thel'var explained. Emotion, proximity, danger. Nicolas already felt it, a warmth, an awareness of Axane beyond sight. I can feel you, she murmured. Like gravity. That's accurate, Thel'var said. Syl'vara broke the silence. What now? Axane straightened. Secure the palace. Investigate everyone with access to me. Quietly hunt Thel'var. And, she turned to Nicolas, and her skin flickered with that warm, dark green color he was beginning to recognize. Third, you're going to teach me how to see like a human. If I'm going to survive this, I need to learn how to spot threats the way you do. And, she hesitated, then continued with a small smile. And I find I'm curious about your world, about the place that forges people like you. The training room Axane chose was a private space adjacent to her chambers, a room that had once been used by her father for meditation and martial practice. It was circular, with walls of polished dark stone that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. The floor was covered in mats that looked soft but had the firmness of good training surfaces. Nicolas approved. This wasn't some decorative space meant to impress visitors. This was a room designed for actual work. Okay, he said, setting down the few pieces of equipment he'd requisitioned, mostly simple objects of varying weights and textures. First principle of Aegis Sight. You're not actually using your eyes alone. You're using all your senses together to build a complete picture of your environment. Axane, who had changed from her formal gown into something more practical, a fitted tunic and leggings that emphasized her lithe form in ways Nicolas was trying not to notice, nodded seriously. Like meditation techniques? Similar, but more active. On Ardent Vale, we call it reading the air. You have to be aware of everything at once, not just what you see, but what you smell, what you hear, even what you feel in your bones. Show me. Nicolas closed his eyes. Right now, there are 4 guards outside this room, 2 by the main door, 2 at the emergency exit. The one by the door on the left is nervous, his breathing is slightly faster than his partner's. There's a servant 3 corridors away carrying something hot, I can smell it on the air currents. And you, He opened his eyes and looked directly at her. You're excited but also scared. Your skin is shifting between colors faster than usual, and your scent has a sharp note that wasn't there this morning. Axane blinked. That's incredibly perceptive, and slightly unnerving. That's the point. A predator who can read his environment has a massive advantage over one who can't. I'm not a predator, Axane said, a bit defensively. You're a queen of an interstellar empire. You're absolutely a predator. You just use different tools than I do. He saw her consider this, saw the moment when she accepted the truth of it. Her skin settled into a determined blue. Teach me, she said. They started with the basics. Nicolas had her close her eyes and identify objects by sound alone, the slight whisper of fabric, the nearly inaudible hum of electronic devices, the rhythm of breathing from the guards outside. Ilyssarians had excellent hearing, better than humans in many ways, but Axane had never been trained to actively use it. After an hour of sound training, they moved to scent. This was harder. Ilyssarians could smell, but their olfactory sense was less developed than humans. Still, Axane proved to be a quick study. By the end of the second hour, she could reliably identify when one of the guards outside had been replaced based solely on the subtle shift in scent patterns. Good, Nicolas said. Now comes the hard part, physical awareness. What do you mean? On high-gravity worlds, you learn to feel your environment through your body. The way air moves around objects, the vibrations through the floor when someone walks. The subtle changes in pressure that tell you something large is nearby. I don't think I can learn that. My body didn't evolve for. No, but you can learn to use what you have more effectively. Nicolas moved behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. Close your eyes. She did, and he saw her skin flicker with a color he was learning meant nervousness mixed with anticipation. I'm going to move around the room, he said, his voice low and close to her ear. I want you to track me without opening your eyes. Use the sound of my footsteps, the way the air moves, anything you can perceive. He stepped away, and Axane's head immediately turned to follow him. Good, she was using her hearing. He moved slowly at first, circling her in a wide arc. She tracked him easily. Then he went silent. Nicolas had learned to move quietly in his third year of training on Ardent Vale. It was necessary when you were hunting prey that could hear a heartbeat from 50 meters away. He circled back around, moving with the deliberate care of someone who weighed significantly more than the environment expected. Axane's head swiveled, uncertain. She'd lost him. Where am I? He asked softly. I don't know, I can't hear you. So, use something else. What do you feel? He was directly behind her now, close enough to touch. He saw her concentrate, saw her skin shift through colors as she processed sensory information. She hesitated. You're behind me, close. I can feel the warmth of your body. Good, what else? You're breathing. It's very quiet, but I can hear it now that I'm listening for it. And, she smiled, you smell like the training mats. You were lying on them earlier. Excellent. Nicolas moved around to face her, still silent. Now, without opening your eyes, I'm going to attack you. Block me. Her eyes flew open. What? Trust me. Close your eyes. Reluctantly, she did. Nicolas waited a moment, then launched a slow, telegraphed strike toward her shoulder, slow enough that even with her eyes closed, she should be able to sense it. She flinched but didn't block. His hand stopped an inch from her shoulder. You felt that coming, he said. I know you did, but you didn't trust yourself, again. They practiced for another hour, with Nicolas gradually increasing the speed and unpredictability of his strikes. By the end, Axane was blocking about 60% of them, not great by combat standards, but impressive for someone who'd never trained like this before. Now we combine everything, Nicolas said. He picked up a small sphere he'd brought about the size of a marble, but made of the same dense metal as his homeworld's construction materials. I'm going to throw this at you, fast. You need to catch it or deflect it. That's impossible, I can't. He threw it. The sphere crossed the distance in a blur. Axane's hand snapped up instinctively, and she actually caught it. She stared at the metal ball in her palm, her skin flashing bright blue with shock. How did I do that? You trusted your instincts. Your body knew what to do, you just had to get out of its way. Nicolas stepped closer, taking her hand in his and feeling the weight of the sphere. This is what I mean by reading the air. You saw the trajectory before your conscious mind processed it. You felt the movement, heard the whistle of displacement, maybe even smelled the change in air pressure. All of it together gave you the information you needed. Axane was staring up at him, and Nicolas realized how close they were standing. He could see the patterns in her skin, not just the color changes, but the subtle textures, like someone had painted her with starlight. Her eyes, huge and luminous, held his gaze with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "You see me differently," she said softly, "don't you? Not just as a queen or a political entity, you see me as a person." "Yes. No one else does. They see the crown, the title, the power. But you see me." "I see someone who's stronger than she thinks she is," Nicolas said. "Someone who's learning to trust herself. Someone who—" The blood bond flared. It wasn't painful, but it was intense. Nicolas felt a rush of emotion that wasn't his own fear, yes, but also desire and confusion and something deeper he couldn't name. He saw Axane gasp, knew she was feeling the same thing from him. Their physiology might be different, but in that moment the bond made it clear. The attraction between them wasn't one-sided. "Nicolas," Axane whispered, and her hand came up to touch his face. Her fingers were cool against his skin, delicate but not weak. "This is probably a terrible idea." "Definitely a terrible idea," he agreed. She kissed him anyway. It was awkward at first, their mouths weren't shaped quite the same, their anatomy different enough that they had to figure out what worked. But they adapted quickly, and what started as tentative exploration became something deeper, more urgent. Nicolas' hands found her waist, feeling the alien architecture of her body under his fingers. She was lighter than any human woman, but there was strength in her frame, a flexibility that let her move in ways that shouldn't be possible. She pressed against him, and he felt the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her tunic. The blood bond pulsed between them, amplifying everything. He could feel her desire mixing with his own, could sense the exact moment when her nervousness transformed into want. "We should stop," he said against her mouth, even as his hands slid up her back. "We absolutely should," she agreed, even as she pulled him closer. They didn't stop. They didn't go further, either both of them maintaining just enough control to recognize that there were boundaries that shouldn't be crossed in a training room with guards standing outside the door. But they explored the space between restraint and abandon with an intensity that left them both breathless. When they finally broke apart, Axane's skin was glowing that warm, dark green, and her chest was heaving with breaths that had nothing to do with combat training. "That," she said, "was not part of the lesson plan." "No," Nicolas agreed, his voice rough. "But I'm not sorry it happened." "Neither am I." She touched his face again, her expression serious. "But we need to be careful, Nicolas. If the court finds out about this, it could be used against us. Against you especially. They already see you as a barbarian human corrupting their queen. If they knew we were—" "I know." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, feeling her shiver. "We'll be careful. But Axane, I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. I'm not going to pretend I don't want it to happen again." Her smile was incandescent. "Good, because I want it to happen again too, just not right now. Right now, we have a traitor to catch." The information came 3 days later, delivered by Captain Syl'vara with an expression of deep distaste. Someone had responded to the quiet bounty on Thel'var's whereabouts, claiming to know where the former High Councilor had gone to ground. The catch? The informant would only meet in the lower tiers of the capital, the sprawling undercity, where the law was more a suggestion than a rule. "It's obviously a trap," Syl'vara said, standing at attention in Axane's private office. "They'll be expecting you to send guards, probably have ambush points prepared." "Then I won't send guards," Axane said calmly. "I'll go myself." The reaction was immediate and loud. Syl'vara's skin flashed with shock, and even Nicolas, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, made a sound of protest. "Your Majesty, that's insane," Syl'vara said. "The lower tiers are dangerous even for armed guards. For you to go personally is exactly why it might work," Axane interrupted. "They're expecting guards. They're not expecting me. And besides," she glanced at Nicolas, "I won't be alone. 2 people against an entire undercity full of criminals? That's not better. It is if one of those people is a high-gravity human who can throw rocks through reinforced armor," Axane pointed out. "And if the other is the queen, who knows these streets better than you think." That caught Nicolas's attention. "You've been to the lower tiers?" "When I was younger, yes. Before I took the throne, I used to sneak out of the palace in disguise." She smiled at the memory. "My father never knew. Or if he did, he never said anything." Syl'vara looked like she was aging in real time. "Your Majesty, I cannot in good conscience allow this. As captain of your guard." "As captain of the guard, you serve at my pleasure," Axane said, her voice taking on the tone of command that brooked no argument. and right now, it pleases me to go into the lower tiers with my eternal protector and meet this informant. You will provide us with disguises and a secure route to the lower levels. You will not follow us, and you will not alert anyone else to what we're doing. Is that clear?" Syl'vara's jaw worked silently for a moment, then she bowed stiffly. "As you command, Your Majesty." 4 hours later, Nicolas found himself descending through access tunnels he didn't even know existed, wearing clothes that definitely didn't fit his frame. The disguise that had been provided was simple: a worker's coverall that was too short in the arms and too tight across the shoulders, plus a hood that cast his face in shadow. Axane wore similar clothes, though hers actually fit properly. She'd done something to her skin to dampen the natural glow somehow, making her look less like royalty and more like any other Ilyssarian trying to survive in the capital's lower levels. "How do I look?" she asked as they emerged from the tunnel into a dimly lit market street. "Like someone who's trying not to be noticed," Nicolas said honestly. "It's working. I barely recognized you." The lower tiers were nothing like the palace levels. Where the upper city was all crystal and light and careful beauty, the undercity was pragmatic metal and harsh illumination. The ceilings were lower, barely 8 feet in most places, which meant Nicolas had to be careful not to hit his head. The air smelled of machine oil and cooking food, and too many people living in too small a space. But there was life here. Real, messy, authentic life. People argued and laughed and conducted business with an energy that the upper levels lacked. Nicolas found himself relaxing slightly. This felt more familiar than the palace, more like the cramped stations and colony habs where he'd spent most of his career. "The meeting point is in the Copper District," Axane said quietly, leading him through the crowds with surprising confidence. "About 20 minutes' walk from here. Stay close." They made their way through the Undercity, and Nicolas kept his senses alert. The training he'd done with Axane had sharpened his awareness even more than usual. He could read the crowd, identify potential threats, track multiple conversations simultaneously. Most importantly, he could feel Axane through the blood bond. She was alert but not afraid, moving through these streets with the confidence of someone who knew them well. It occurred to him that this might be the first time since the assassination attempt that she'd felt truly free. No courtiers watching her every move, no protocol dictating her actions. Down here, she was just another person in the crowd. "You miss this," he said, "don't you?" "Every day," she admitted. "Being queen means being isolated, being watched constantly, being not quite real." She glanced at him, her expression soft. "It's why I'm so drawn to you, I think. You treat me like a person, not a symbol." "You are a person." "I know, but you're one of the few who remembers that." They reached the Copper District, and Nicolas immediately went on high alert. The crowd thinned here, and the atmosphere changed. This was gang territory. He could read it in the way people walked, the way they watched strangers. They were being evaluated, judged, priced. The meeting point was a small tavern called the Bent Nail, which looked exactly as inviting as the name suggested. Nicolas went in first, his body blocking the doorway while his eyes adjusted to the dim interior. The tavern was about half full. Most of the patrons were Ilyssarians, but he spotted a few other species scattered around a pair of Krex traitors, something that might have been a Voltan, and in the back corner, a figure whose species wasn't immediately obvious. "Back corner," Axane whispered. "That's them." They made their way to the corner table, and the figure looked up as they approached. They, and Nicolas was genuinely uncertain about gender or even species, wore a patchwork coat that had been repaired so many times it was more patch than original fabric. Their face was hidden behind a breather mask, but their eyes were sharp and intelligent. "You came," the figure said, their voice modulated by the mask into something gender-neutral and slightly mechanical. "Didn't think you would." "You have information about Thel'var," Axane said, sliding into the seat across from them. Nicolas remained standing, positioning himself where he could watch both their informant and the rest of the tavern. "Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Depends on whether the payment is good." "The payment will be excellent if the information is real. Where is he?" The figure laughed a harsh, bitter sound. "Straight to business. I like that. Okay, here's what I know. Your High Counselor isn't in the city anymore. He left 3 days ago on a private transport, headed for the mining colonies in the Outer Reach." "The mining colonies? Why would he go there?" "Because that's where his real power base is. Thel'var doesn't just sit in the palace looking pretty. He's been building a network for years, loyal workers, bought officials, mercenary companies on his payroll. Half the mines in the Outer Reach answer to him, not you." Axane's skin flickered through several colors before settling on an angry dark green. I never authorized that. You never knew about it. That's the point. He's been preparing for this for a long time. The assassination attempt? That was just his opening move. Now he's going to consolidate his power in the Outer Reach and then come back with an army. How do you know all this? Nicolas asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. The figure turned to look at him, and even through the mask, Nicolas could feel the weight of their gaze. Because I used to work for him. I was one of his agents in the lower tiers, keeping tabs on dissidents and troublemakers. But then, he ordered me to do something I couldn't stomach, and I realized what kind of person I was working for. They paused. He wanted me to plant explosives in a residential block. 40 families lived there. 40 families who had nothing to do with politics just happened to be in the way of one of his schemes. Did you do it? Axane asked quietly. No, I warned them instead. Got them out before his backup plan could kill them. Been on the run ever since. The figure slid a data chip across the table. Everything I know about his operations is on there. Locations, contacts, financial records. It's not complete, but it's a start. Axane picked up the chip, weighing it in her palm. Why are you helping me now? Why not take this to the press, or to my enemies? Because I've lived in the lower tiers my whole life, and I know what happens when people like Thel'var get real power. They don't care about people like us. We're just resources to be used and discarded. The figure stood. I'm helping you because I think you might actually be different. Prove me right, Your Majesty. They knew. Nicolas's hand went to his hip, where his weapon would be if he were in uniform, but the figure just laughed. Relax, big guy. I figured out who you were about 30 seconds after you walked in. Nobody moves like you do. Too much power, too much control. And her, they gestured at Axane. She might have dampened her skin, but she still moves like royalty. Can't hide breeding. Are we in danger? Nicolas asked bluntly. From me? No, from everyone else in this tavern, who's about to realize they're drinking with the Queen? The figure pulled their coat tighter. Yeah, probably. I'd recommend leaving. Now. As if on cue, Nicolas heard it, a change in the tavern's atmosphere. Conversations stopping, the scrape of chairs. Someone near the bar had recognized Axane despite her disguise, and the word was spreading like wildfire. Time to go, he said, already moving. He grabbed Axane's arm and pulled her toward the back of the tavern, where his enhanced senses had identified a secondary exit. The informant vanished into the crowd, their purpose fulfilled. They made it maybe 10 steps before the first attacker lunged at Axane. Nicolas' fist connected with the attacker's jaw before they got within 2 feet of Axane. The sound of bone breaking echoed through the suddenly silent tavern, and the attacker crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Run, Nicolas growled, shoving Axane toward the back exit. The tavern exploded into chaos. Whether they were loyal to Thel'var, hoping for reward money, or just saw an opportunity to strike at authority, at least a dozen patrons surged toward them. Nicolas didn't bother with complex tactics, he just moved. High-gravity combat training wasn't subtle. It was about using your mass and momentum like a weapon. Nicolas grabbed a table and flipped it into the path of 3 attackers, the heavy wooden furniture hitting them with enough force to break ribs. He didn't wait to see them fall, he was already moving, his body flowing through the crowd like a wrecking ball disguised as a man. An Ilyssarian with a vibroknife slashed at him. Nicolas caught the wrist, twisted, and used the attacker's own momentum to send them crashing into a support pillar. The knife clattered to the floor. Someone fired an energy weapon. The shot went wide, hitting a wall and leaving a scorched crater. Nicolas identified the shooter, a Krex mercenary by the door, and threw a chair. The furniture crossed the distance in under a second and hit the Krex in the center mass, knocking them through the door. Nicolas! Axane's voice cut through the chaos. He turned and saw her at the back exit, holding off 2 attackers with a piece of broken pipe she'd grabbed from somewhere. She was using the techniques he'd taught her, reading their movements and staying just ahead of their strikes, but she was outnumbered, and more were coming. Nicolas launched himself toward her, covering the distance in 3 massive strides. He grabbed one attacker by the back of their coat and simply threw them high-gravity strength, letting him hurl a full-grown Ilyssarian like they weighed nothing. They hit the ceiling with a wet crunch and didn't get back up. The second attacker took one look at Nicolas and ran. Out, Nicolas commanded, pushing Axane through the exit into a narrow alley. Move! They ran. Behind them, the sounds of the brawl were fading, but Nicolas could hear pursuit boots on metal, the hiss of weapons being readied. They had maybe 30 seconds before the chase caught up. The alley twisted and turned, connecting to other alleys in a maze that Nicolas couldn't hope to navigate, but Axane knew these streets. She led him through the labyrinth with absolute confidence, taking turns that seemed random but clearly weren't. "Left here," she gasped, her breathing labored. "Then down there's a maintenance shaft." Energy fire lit up the alley behind them. Nicolas felt the heat of the shot pass inches from his head. "Too close," he snarled. "How many?" Through the blood bond, he felt Axane reach out with the senses he'd taught her. She tilted her head, listening, feeling. 6 behind us, maybe more coming from the sides. Nicolas, we're being herded. She was right. The pursuers weren't trying to kill them, they were driving them toward something. Toward a trap. "Do we have a choice?" he asked. "Not really. Then we spring it and deal with whatever's waiting." They emerged from the alley into a wider corridor, something that had probably been a freight tunnel in the Undercity's early days. And waiting for them, arranged in a semicircle that blocked all exits except the one they'd just come through, were at least 20 armed fighters. These weren't tavern brawlers or opportunistic thugs, these were professionals. Their equipment was military grade, their formation textbook perfect. And leading them, wearing armor that probably cost more than Nicolas made in a year, was an Ilyssarian male with silver-toned skin and cold, calculating eyes. "Your Majesty," the male said with a mocking bow, "Councilor Thel'var sends his regards." "A little early for regards," Nicolas said, stepping in front of Axane. "He's not dead yet." The male smiled. "Humor, how delightfully primitive. I am Commander Velkan, and I have the honor of collecting a bounty that will make me very wealthy." "The Councilor wants you alive, Your Majesty. Your human pet, however." He gestured negligently. He didn't specify what condition the human should be in. "You're making a mistake," Axane said, her voice ringing with authority despite their situation. "I am your queen. Stand down and I'll show mercy." "You're a fugitive hiding in the lower tiers," Velkan countered. "The Councilor has evidence of your compromised state. Consorting with aliens, abandoning your duties, possibly suffering from some form of madness brought on by trauma. Very sad, very convenient." Nicolas felt Axane's anger spike through the blood bond, felt her skin flash through colors that probably meant she was about to do something reckless. He put a hand on her shoulder, keeping his eyes on Velkan. "How much is he paying you?" Nicolas asked conversationally. "More than you can imagine." "Probably. I'm just a security specialist. But here's the thing about mercenaries, you only get paid if you survive to collect." Nicolas rolled his shoulders, feeling his muscles loosen, his body preparing for combat. "So here's my counteroffer. Walk away now, and I won't kill all of you." Velkan laughed, arrogant even in defeat. "Very well, take them." The mercenaries moved in concert, a coordinated assault meant to overwhelm through superior numbers. It was good tactics against most opponents. But most opponents weren't from high-gravity death worlds. Nicolas moved. Later, Axane would try to describe what she saw to Captain Syl'vara, and she would fail. Words like fast and strong didn't capture it. Nicolas didn't move fast, he moved efficiently, every motion serving a purpose, no energy wasted. He flowed through the mercenaries like water finding cracks in stone, except water didn't break bones and rupture organs. The first merc to reach him swung a shock baton. Nicolas caught it mid-swing, crushed the weapon with his bare hand, and drove his elbow into the merc's face. The impact sounded like a hammer hitting meat. 2 more came at him from opposite sides. Nicolas grabbed one by the arm and used them as a club, swinging their body into their partner with enough force to knock them both out of the fight. Someone fired an energy weapon. The shot grazed Nicolas's shoulder, burning through fabric and leaving a scorched line across his skin. He didn't even slow down. He closed the distance to the shooter in a blink, grabbed their weapon, crushed it, and headbutted them with enough force to crack their helmet. Velkan was shouting orders, trying to reorganize his forces, but it was like trying to organize a tactical response to a natural disaster. Nicolas was everywhere at once, a blur of controlled violence that left broken bodies in his wake. A merc with a powered blade managed to land a hit, the blade cutting through Nicolas' coverall and drawing blood from his ribs. Nicolas grabbed the merc's wrist, twisted, and broke it in 3 places. Then he threw the merc at their commander hard enough that Velkan had to dive out of the way. 10 seconds. That's how long it took Nicolas to go through 15 trained mercenaries, 10 seconds of focused, brutal efficiency. The survivors ran. Even Velkan, his expensive armor not looking quite so impressive anymore, scrambled to his feet and fled down a side tunnel. Nicolas let them go. He turned to Axane, who was standing with her back against the wall, her skin cycling through colors so fast it was almost strobing, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like awe. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with adrenaline. No, I'm Nicolas, that was." She couldn't finish the sentence. She just stared at him, her gaze tracking over the cuts and bruises he'd sustained, the blood dripping from the wound in his side, the absolute absence of fear in his expression. "We need to move," he said. "They'll regroup or call for backup." "Right. Yes. Of course." She pulled herself together with visible effort and led him deeper into the tunnels. They found a maintenance alcove several hundred meters away, a small space with a locked door that Axane opened with codes she shouldn't have known. Inside was nothing but pipes and storage containers, but it was defensible and hidden. Nicolas slumped against the wall, finally letting his body acknowledge the damage. The wound in his side was bleeding steadily, and the graze on his shoulder throbbed. His knuckles were split open, and he was pretty sure he'd cracked at least one rib. Axane knelt in front of him, her hands trembling as she examined his injuries. "I need to treat these. You're bleeding badly. I've had worse." "That's not comforting." She pulled supplies from a hidden compartment. Apparently she'd stashed emergency gear down here during her youthful excursions. "Hold still." She cleaned and dressed his wounds with surprising competence, her touch gentle despite her obvious distress. Through the blood bond, Nicolas could feel her emotions, fear for him, mixing with guilt that he'd been hurt, protecting her, but also something else, something he was starting to recognize. "You could have died," she whispered, as she sealed the wound on his side with medical adhesive. "Any of those hits could have been fatal. But they weren't. Nicolas, you can't just..." She stopped, took a breath. "You can't throw yourself into danger like that. The blood bond means if you die, I die. You're not just risking yourself anymore." "I know, but that works both ways, Axane. If you die, I die. Which means keeping you alive is literally keeping myself alive. Kind of perfect motivation." She laughed, but it was shaky. "You're impossible. I'm practical." She finished bandaging him and sat back on her heels, her skin settling into that warm, dark green he'd learned meant affection and desire. "Thank you. For protecting me. For being..." She gestured helplessly. "For being you." "You're welcome." Nicolas reached out and touched her face, feeling the cool smoothness of her skin under his fingers. "We should stay here for a few hours. Let things calm down before we try to get back to the palace." "Agreed." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "I'm sorry I got us into this mess." "You didn't. Thel'var did, and we're going to make him pay for it." "Yes," Axane said, her eyes opening with a fierce light. "Yes, we are." They returned to the palace 6 hours later through the same hidden tunnels that had swallowed them into the city's underbelly. The final door slid open on a quiet service corridor, and Captain Syl'vara was waiting. Relief crossed her face first, then anger, then, reluctantly, respect. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing a fraction too stiffly. "When you didn't return after 4 hours, I nearly sent search teams. But your protector sent a coded message saying you were secure. Action freer. We had complications," Axane said evenly, "but we have what we came for." She held up the data chip. Syl'vara exhaled once, sharply. "Good, because Councilor Thel'var has acted." They were ushered into a sealed communications room where Dr. Venthar and several senior advisors waited. The tension was immediate, thick enough that Nicolas felt it in his spine. Venthar activated the holo. Thel'var's face filled the air. "Citizens of Ilyssar," the recording began, his tone grave and paternal. "It is with great sorrow that I inform you of a crisis within our royal house. Queen Axane has fallen under the influence of foreign elements. She has abandoned the palace, neglected her duties, and consorted with aliens who possess technology capable of altering Ilyssarian neurochemistry." Images followed, doctored, intimate, carefully framed to imply control rather than closeness. "Therefore," Thel'var concluded, "as acting regent under the Emergency Powers Act, I am declaring Her Majesty unfit to rule. This is not a coup, it is a rescue." The holo vanished. "When?" Axane asked. 30 minutes ago, Venthar said. "The Empire is divided, the upper districts lean toward him, the lower tiers are rioting, the military is uncertain." Axane's skin had gone white, not fear, Nicolas knew now, but fury held in check. "If I don't appear publicly," she said, "his lie becomes truth. And if you do," Nicolas said, "he'll strike." "Then we let him." She turned. "We go to the throne room." Venthar hesitated. "We don't yet have proof strong enough to sway the undecided." Then we make proof, Nicolas said. We announce a public address in 4 hours. If Thel'var is mobilizing forces, he'll accelerate. He won't resist the chance to end this cleanly. Axane studied him, then nodded. Prepare the broadcast. The palace shifted into motion. Syl'vara locked down the throne room with only her most trusted guards. Venthar's team tore through the data chip, uncovering years of corruption, mercenary contracts, weapons shipments, coded communications planning Axane's removal. Nicolas stayed with Axane, rehearsing contingencies, fallback routes, worst-case outcomes. And if we don't survive? She asked quietly. Then we don't survive alone. The throne room filled slowly, cameras activated, guards took position. Axane ascended the dais wearing the crown of stars, her presence commanding silence before she spoke a word. Nicolas stood below, every sense tuned outward. The doors opened. Thel'var entered with an entourage far too large and far too armed. Your Majesty, he said, bowing shallowly, I'm relieved to see you alive. Alive and sovereign, Axane replied. Unlike the authority you've claimed without mandate. She spoke calmly. Methodically, she named the poison, the pheromones, his finances, his alliances. Data flared to life around them, undeniable. Thel'var snarled. Fabrication. Then prove your loyalty, Syl'vara said. Submit your forces for verification. Thel'var's mask shattered. Enough, he spat, gesturing. 50 armored soldiers marched forward. These are the Queen's own guard, he declared, and they have judged you unfit. They are not, Syl'vara said coldly. They are mercenaries. Is now their dax noted in evacuation. The mercenaries opened fire. The throne room erupted. Nicolas moved without hesitation, dragging Axane into cover, returning fire, buying time. Plasma scorched stone, columns shattered. The broadcast continued, unblinking. When his rifle died, he didn't stop. He advanced. The fight was brutal and close, blood bonds screaming, feeding him Axane's fear and trust in equal measure. Syl'vara's guards rallied, reinforcements arrived. And the Empire watched its would-be regent exposed in real time. When it ended, Thel'var was on his knees. Axane approached him, crown blazing. You are charged with treason, she said. You will stand trial. She turned to the cameras. You have seen the truth. The Empire stands not because of lies, but because we confront them. The broadcast ended. Axane swayed. Nicolas caught her. We did it, he said. We endured, she corrected. She kissed him openly, unapologetically, before ordering the chamber cleared. 6 weeks later, the city celebrated beneath rising moons. Nicolas stood on the balcony of Axane's chambers, the air warm, the Empire quiet in a way earned only after crisis. You're brooding, Axane said, joining him. Contemplating. She smiled, wrapping her arms around him. No regrets? She asked. None. Good, because I'm not letting you go. Can't, he said lightly. Blood bond. She traced the scars on his chest. The court is scandalized. They'll recover. So will the Empire. She rested her forehead against his. Partners, she said softly. Partners, he agreed. Inside, the doors closed, shutting out history and politics alike. For the first time since the crown settled on her brow, Axane allowed herself to simply be held. And the Empire endured not because it was flawless, but because it chose to stand together.
And that brings us to the end of today's story. Thanks for taking the time to listen. I really appreciate it. This channel is all about original, human-focused science fiction, and every story is presented as a part of a larger collection. If you'd like to continue, there's another story from this channel on screen now that fits right alongside this one. Feel free to jump into that next, and I'll see you there.